The sound that meant we were all alive went wrong. I felt the change before I heard it, a subtle shift in the vibration to the floorboards of my shack, a missing beat in the camp's mechanical heart. I was sharpening the knife, a pointless ritual of maintenance on a blade that was already sharper than any of us had a right to own. My face in the blade's reflection was a stranger's, all hard lines and grim purpose. It was a good face, a face I had worked on, the face of Kexey. I practiced the slight narrowing of the eyes, the subtle clench of the jaw that conveyed readiness. Then the generator outside coughed, a wet, sick sound that was followed by a sputtering whine. The single bulb over my small table flickered once, twice, and died, plunging the room into the gray pre-dawn light. The performance was about to begin. I remembered the silence before this life. It was a different kind, a quiet that came after my agent stopped calling. I was in a rented room in Haven, nursing a bottle of bourbon and the spectacular failure of my career. The meltdown on the set of Apex Predator had been cinematic. I screamed at the director, called the cinematographer a hack, and threw a prop axe into a rack of expensive lights. It was all because the consultant, a real logger from this town, had shown me how to set a snare in a way that made my 2 weeks of rehearsed fumbling look exactly like what it was, a lie. They fired me before lunch. I stayed in Haven because the thought of explaining this to my father was worse than the idea of just disappearing. 2 weeks later, the world started to disappear with me. It began with a feeling of deep exhaustion. People started moving slowly, their sentences trailing off. They would stare into the middle distance, lost in what they called vivid daydreams. That was stage 1. I remember standing on the porch of the general store, watching a woman named Mrs. Gable sit down on a curb and simply not get up again. Her face was placid. She didn't respond when her husband called her name. That was stage 2. The silence that followed was absolute. No cars on the highway, no planes overhead, just the wind in the giant firs and the growing smell of something like damp soil and old mushrooms. HFS, they called it on the emergency broadcasts before they too went silent. Hypnagogic fading syndrome. A polite name for the end of everything. People saw my Gore-Tex jacket and my expensive boots, gear I'd bought for the movie, and they heard the confident lines I spouted, lines lifted directly from the script, and they clung to me. Kexey, the apex predator, was born from their terror and my shame. I opened my door and stepped into the mud. The generator was silent. A crowd of about 30 people was already gathered around it, their faces pale and anxious in the dim light. They turned as one when they saw me, their expressions a mixture of fear and hope. They were my audience. My gaze swept over them, landing for a moment on Kexey, who stood near the front, his thin frame tense with worry. He gave me a small, desperate nod. "It's all right," I said, my voice a low baritone I had perfected for the role. I walked to the generator, the crowd parting before me like I was a prophet. Hesitation is a gravestone. I pulled the annotated script from my jacket pocket, its pages greasy and soft from use. I flipped to a tab section marked Field Mechanics. I ran my finger down a list of highlighted terms, pretending to diagnose the problem. The words meant nothing to me. Carburetor, gasket, piston. Magneto-coil induction failure, I announced, the words feeling good and solid in my mouth. A few people nodded, as if they understood. A man with sawdust in his beard stepped forward. "Chadique, I used to work on the saws up at the mill. Maybe I could." "Secure the perimeter," I ordered, cutting him off without looking at him. "Check the west wall. Kexey, I want a full inventory of the water barrels, now." They scrambled to obey. I needed them busy. I needed them away from me while I figured this out. I opened the generator's housing, looking at the tangle of wires and greasy parts. It was just a machine, a black, stubborn box. I remembered a scene from a movie where the hero hot-wired a truck with a wrench. I found a wrench in the toolkit nearby and touched it to 2 terminals, hoping for a spark, for anything. The machine gave a loud crack and a puff of black smoke shot into my face. Shegji shoved me aside. She had been standing at the edge of the crowd, her arms crossed, watching the whole pathetic show. She didn't say a word. She pulled a small tool from her belt, unscrewed something from the engine block, and held it up. The tip was black and corroded. She scraped it clean with the edge of her knife, then pointed to a thin black tube that was dripping a single drop of fuel onto the ground. She wrapped the crack in the tube with a piece of electrical tape from her pocket, screwed the clean part back in, and yanked the pull cord. The generator roared to life, loud and steady. The lights in the shacks around the compound flickered on. Shegji wiped her greasy hands on her worn fatigue pants and walked away. The silence she left behind was more damning than any accusation. I turned to look for Kexey, needing to see his unwavering belief, but for the first time, I saw a flicker of confusion in the boy's eyes. It was a tiny crack in the foundation of my world, and it terrified me. The crisis passed, but the air remained tense for the rest of the day. Then, at evening roll call, 2 of our scouts, brothers named Finn and Riley, were missing. Protocol. A protocol I had written myself based on a chapter in the Army Survival Manual, dictated we wait 24 hours. Radio silence was common, and premature rescue parties were a waste of precious resources. But I could feel the eyes on me. I could feel Shegji's silent judgment from across the yard. I could feel the doubt she had planted spreading like a contagion. "They're 2 hours late," I said, my voice ringing with authority. "We're going after them. Now." I unrolled a map on the hood of a rusted-out pickup truck. "We'll use a spiral grid pattern, starting from their last known checkpoint." I pointed to a spot on the map, a route I had chosen because it was detailed in a chapter about tracking. Shegji stepped forward. "That route takes you within a mile of the Whispering Fields." A murmur went through the group. The Whispering Fields was a low valley where a convoy of refugees had succumbed to HFS months ago. Their bodies had never been burned. On a bad wind, it was a death sentence. "The wind is out of the north," I said, bluffing. I hadn't checked. "It's a risk we have to take." "That's not a risk," she said, her voice flat. "It's a guess." "We're wasting time," I snapped, rolling up the map. "I'm leading the party. Anyone with me, grab your gear." Kexey was the first to move, his loyalty a balm on my frayed nerves. 6 others followed. We spent 3 hours walking through the dense, wet forest. My search pattern was useless. We were lost. The trees were too thick to get any clear sight lines, and the terrain didn't match the descriptions in the script. The sun was setting, and the cold was setting in. I saw the look on the faces of the men with me. The doubt was back, stronger than before. Just as I was about to call it off, a horn blew from the direction of the camp. 3 long blasts. The all-clear signal. We trudged back in silence. Finn and Riley were standing by the fire, drinking mugs of hot broth. Their radio had been damaged in a fall. They had made it back on their own an hour after we left. As the others clapped them on the back, relieved, I saw Shegji lower a pair of binoculars. She wasn't looking at the returning scouts. She was looking at the map still spread on the truck's hood, then at me. Her face was grim. She knew. She knew I had not just been wrong. I had led a search party in the completely wrong direction, marching them straight towards a field of spore corpses on nothing more than a line from a script. A large logger named Marcus, who had been on the search party, threw his pack on the ground. "That's it," he shouted, his voice raw with anger. "That was a fool's errand. You almost got us all killed. You have no idea what you're doing." The whole camp went quiet. This was it. The moment I had dreaded every single day. My heart pounded against my ribs. I was Seydoux Keefe again, a failed actor in a dirty costume. But then the training took over. I stepped into the light of the fire, letting it illuminate my face. I let the silence stretch, building the tension. "He asks you to doubt," I began, my voice a low rumble. I pointed a finger at Marcus. "He wants you to be afraid, and you should be. But you should not be afraid of me. You should be afraid of the doubt he is selling. It is that doubt that tore apart Blackwood Creek. It is that suspicion that left the people of Eagle's Nest to starve each other in their own homes. We have order, or we have nothing." I swept my gaze across their faces, playing on their deepest fears, the stories they whispered around the fire at night. Kexey stepped forward, tears in his eyes. "Jedek saved us," he said, his voice trembling. "He brought us all together. Marcus, you're just scared." I'm putting it to a vote, I boomed, seizing the moment. Do we allow this poison to fracture us from within, or do we cut it out? All who say Marcus should leave Haven, raise your hand. I raised my own. Kexey's hand shot up instantly, one by one. Then, in a flood of terrified consensus, hands went up around the fire. Marcus stared at them, his face a mask of betrayal. He was shoved toward the gate. He didn't struggle. He just looked at me with pure, unadulterated contempt. As two men unbarred the heavy log gate, I looked across the compound. Shegji was watching me, her hand resting on the pistol at her hip. The skepticism in her eyes was gone. The contempt was gone too. All that was left was cold, clear hate. The gate creaked shut behind Marcus, and the bar slammed home, the sound echoing in the sudden quiet of the night. I had won. But I had just made my first real enemy. The engine sound was too clean for this world, a smooth mechanical purr that cut through the endless whisper of the wind in the pines. It was a sound from before, from a time of paved roads and purpose, and it made the hairs on my arm stand up. I walked to the main gate, forcing a slow, deliberate pace because I knew every eye in Haven was on me, judging my reaction. I rested a hand on the heavy timber of the gate, a pose I'd practiced, projecting calm authority while my heart beat a frantic rhythm against my ribs. A single truck, stripped of any markings and reinforced with welded scrap metal, rolled to a stop 100 yards out. A man got out, moving with an easy confidence that I hated instantly. He was lean and wore clean, practical clothes, a stark contrast to our frayed and patched existence. He carried no visible long gun, just a pistol holstered on his hip. He was a scout, a test. Shegji appeared at my elbow, silent as always. Her hand was near her own pistol. She didn't look at me, her gaze fixed on the visitor. "What's the play, Jedek?" Her voice was flat, a simple question that felt like an accusation. I pulled the worn, greasy script from my jacket pocket, my thumb finding the dog-eared page for first contact with hostiles. I scanned the lines Seydoux had underlined in red pen a lifetime ago. "We show no weakness," I said, my voice a low growl I'd stolen from a dozen better actors. "A predator only respects a bigger predator." I nodded to the guards on the wall, and they swung the gate open just enough for me to step through. I walked out alone into the muddy track, stopping 50 feet from the stranger. "You're a long way from anywhere," I called out, the line feeling good and solid in my mouth. The man smiled, a thin, unpleasant expression. "Depends what you're looking for. We hear you have a surplus of amoxicillin." "Cipro. We have fuel. A fair trade." He was direct, no theatrics. This wasn't in the script. I fell back on instinct, the actor's instinct to dominate the scene. "We have what we need. We don't trade with ghosts." "We're not ghosts," he said, his smile widening slightly. "We're the refiners. We believe this world needs to be cleansed of its dross. Weakness is a disease, same as HFS." My mind went blank. There was no line for this. I could feel Shegji's eyes on my back, could feel the entire community holding its breath behind the wall. I defaulted to my character's core trait, arrogant defiance. "Get back in your truck and drive until you forget you ever saw this place," I said. "Consider that my only act of charity." The scout's eyes crinkled. He wasn't intimidated. He was amused. He looked past me, at our walls, at the smoke from our cook fires, at the faces peering over the top. He saw everything. He nodded slowly, a gesture of confirmation, not defeat. He turned without another word, got back into his truck, and drove away. As I walked back inside, the gate groaning shut behind me. A few of the townsfolk clapped me on the back. They saw victory. I saw the look in that man's eyes and felt a cold dread settle in my stomach. A mile down the road, the truck stopped. I couldn't see what he was doing, but I could imagine it perfectly. A man speaking quietly into a radio, telling his pack what he'd found. A prize defended by a fool. Shegji knew it too. The next day, she began organizing what she called a contingency council, without asking my permission. It was just her, the camp's one nurse, and a couple of the old loggers who knew how to fix things. They met in the generator shed, their voices low and serious. I knew what they were doing. They were preparing for my failure. I watched her from a distance, this quiet woman building a lifeboat while I stood on the bridge of a sinking ship, telling everyone the view was fine. I heard her talking to the nurse one evening as I passed the infirmary, her voice uncharacteristically soft. She spoke of her last community, of a leader who waited too long, who chose caution over action until there was nothing left to save. That fear, I realized, was what made her so dangerous to me. She would never wait. Her challenge became direct a few days later. She had Kexey in the main yard, patiently showing him how to disassemble and clean a rifle. The boy was all concentration, his thin fingers fumbling with the bolt carrier group. He looked up and saw me approaching, his face lighting up with that damnable, unwavering adoration. Shegji's face remained a stone mask. I felt a surge of possessive anger. He was my disciple. She was poisoning him with practicality. I walked over, plucked the rifle from Kexey's hands, and passed it back to a stunned Shegji. I smiled at the boy, a warm, paternal smile I had perfected for a cancelled sitcom pilot. "A gun is useless if your hands are bound," I said, my voice full of cryptic wisdom. I pulled a length of rope from my belt. "Now, let me show you the hangman's knot. A true survivor knows how to send a message." Shegji stared at me, her expression a mixture of contempt and disbelief. She said nothing, just took her rifle and walked away. Kexey, however, looked from her retreating back to the rope in my hand, his eyes wide with wonder. He was torn, I could see it, caught between the dull reality of a clean weapon and the thrilling theater of my pronouncements. He chose the theater. He always chose the theater. The attack came at dusk, a sudden volley of gunfire against the west wall that sent people screaming for cover. It was a probe, not a full assault, but panic is a contagion. My followers looked to me, their faces pale in the flickering firelight, waiting for the prophet to speak. I had no idea what to do. The script had scenes for tracking, for setting snares, for gritty monologues over a campfire. It had nothing about defensive tactics. My eyes scanned the yard, desperate. I saw the road flares stacked near the gate, meant for signaling. An idea sparked, a memory from a different movie, a war epic I'd once auditioned for. A fire break. Yes, a wall of fire. It was dramatic. It was decisive. It was a spectacle. "The flares," I bellowed, pointing with a confident hand. "Light the brush in front of the wall. Burn them out." "No." Shegji was suddenly beside me, grabbing my arm. "The wind is wrong, Jedek. Don't you feel it? It's blowing in from the west, from the Whispering Fields." The Whispering Fields was a valley miles upwind where an entire town had succumbed at once. A place no one went, a permanent spore cloud. I ignored her, shaking her off. Hesitation is a gravestone. "Do it now," my followers, conditioned to my authority, obeyed. They lit the flares and tossed them over the wall. The dry undergrowth caught instantly, erupting in a sheet of orange flame that roared toward the sky. It was a tactically insane move, a pointless gesture that did nothing but illuminate our own position. But then something impossible happened. The heat from the massive fire created a powerful thermal updraft, a column of rising air that changed the pressure of the atmosphere around us. The westerly wind, which should have blown smoke into our faces, suddenly reversed. It was sucked toward the fire, pulling with it a thick, shimmering haze from the direction of the Whispering Fields. Through the flames, I saw the refiners. They had been advancing under the cover of darkness. They stopped dead, their faces illuminated by the fire I had set. They saw the haze rolling towards them, a ghostly wall of death pulled by my fire. They didn't see an accident of physics. They saw a brilliant, suicidal trap. They thought I had summoned the spores on purpose. They broke and ran, melting back into the trees in terror. The people of Haven erupted in cheers. They lifted me onto their shoulders, chanting my name. "Jedek, Jedek, Jedek." I was a hero, a genius, a savior forged from a lie and a miracle of meteorology. I raised my arms in triumph, playing my part. Then I caught my reflection in the dark glass of the watchtower window. It was not a hero looking back at me. It was Seydoux Keefe, his face a mask of abject terror, screaming without a sound, a prisoner in a cage of his own making. The refiners, now convinced they faced a master strategist, settled in for a siege. They were patient, using snipers to pin us down, turning Haven into a pressure cooker. A wasting sickness, born of malnutrition and fear, began to spread through the camp. My own grip on reality started to fray. I spent hours in my cabin talking to my reflection, rehearsing lines, asking Jedek for advice. He never answered. The contingency council, now just the council, demanded a plan. I stood before them, Shegji's cold eyes boring into me, and I had nothing. I clutched my script like a holy text. "The patient predator," I began, the quote tasting like ash, "knows the moment to strike is not when the prey is cornered, but when it believes it has escaped." It was meaningless, but it sounded profound. They stared at me, waiting. Desperate, I flipped to the script's third act, to the climax where my character, Jedek Sykes, saves the day. "Hypothetically," I said, my voice shaking slightly, "a single operative could slip out through the old drainage culvert on the north side, circle around behind their sniper's nest, a silent takedown, sow chaos from within." It was a suicide mission, a piece of Hollywood fantasy. I presented it only to fill the silence, to buy myself another hour. I dismissed them, and they filed out, their shoulders slumped with disappointment. But Kexey stayed behind. He looked at me, and I saw a terrifying light in his eyes, a gleam of pure, fanatical devotion. "Master Jedek," the boy whispered, his hand on the hilt of his makeshift knife. "I understand the mission. I won't fail you." He was gone before dawn. We found his footprints leading to the drainage culvert. He had taken my insane hypothetical bluff and made it real. Hours later, a series of shots echoed from the hills. Then silence. Just before noon, he crawled back to the gate. He had followed the script's instructions, and they had led him directly into a refiner patrol. They shot him in the leg and left him for dead as they advanced their line. We dragged him to the infirmary, delirious with fever, a ragged hole in his thigh already turning a dark, angry color. The nurse looked at it, then at me, her face grim. "It's going septic. Fast. Without antibiotics, he'll lose the leg if he doesn't die first." The antibiotics were in a locked cabinet on the far wall of the infirmary. As she spoke, a single perfect circle of red light appeared on the metal cabinet door. A laser sight. The refiner sniper had moved, and now had a perfect line of sight on our only medicine. The red dot was a period at the end of a sentence, a line drawn between the dying boy and his only salvation. I stared at it, paralyzed, every muscle locked in ice. Kexey was dying because he believed in Jedek Sykes, and I knew with sickening certainty that the bullet that would kill him had been fired from my own script months and months ago. The little red dot was a perfect, unwavering circle of light on the gray metal of the medicine cabinet. It felt like a director's note, a laser pointer highlighting the one prop that mattered in the entire scene. I stood there, unable to move, my whole body a block of cold cement. Kexey moaned on the cot behind me, a low, guttural sound of pain that cut through the silence. He was dying because he had read my lines, because he believed the character I was playing. And now the story was ending with a single, perfectly aimed bullet. The script in my pocket felt heavy, a brick of lies pulling me down. I slowly pulled it out, the pages greasy and soft from 1,000 nervous touches. My thumb found a page near the end, one I knew by heart. It described Jedek Sykes in a moment of triumph, his face grim but resolute after a hard-won victory. "Loss is the whetstone that sharpens the blade of survival," he was supposed to say. The words were hollow, just ink on dead paper. They were poison. They were the weapon that had killed this boy as surely as the refiner's bullet. I looked from the page to my own reflection in the infirmary's dark window. Jedek wasn't there anymore. Only Seydoux Keefe, a failed actor with cheap stubble and terrified eyes. A man who had mimicked survival so well he had forgotten how to live. Shegji came into the room. She didn't look at the sniper's dot or at Kexey. She looked at me, at the script in my hand, at the complete and utter collapse behind my eyes. She saw the fraud, the hollow man clutching his prop. There was no contempt in her face, just a flat, weary exhaustion. She didn't need a confession. "Fix this," she said. Her voice wasn't a challenge to Jedek the hero, it was a command to Seydoux the man. As her words settled in the small room, a new sound began outside, a low growl that vibrated through the floorboards. It was the deep, angry rumble of the refiner's armored truck, and it was getting closer. I walked out of the infirmary and into the chaotic flicker of the camp's central fire. People were running, shouting, their faces tight with fear. The truck hit the main gate with a sound like a giant tree splitting open. Wood splintered and groaned. Shegji was already there, directing a small group of defenders into position, her voice sharp and clear above the noise. They were preparing for the end. I looked at the script one last time, then I walked to the stone fireplace in the main building and tossed the book into the flames. The pages curled, turned brown, then black, and the words that had built my world vanished into smoke. I turned to the shortwave radio on the table. Shegji saw what I was doing and came over, her face a question. "Get ready for your opening," I told her. I spun the dial, the static hissing and crackling, until I found their open frequency. I took the microphone, my hand shaking. I didn't try to sound like a hero. I didn't try to be Jedek. I channeled the raw, abject terror that was flooding my own veins, the fear of a cornered actor who had run out of lines. I gave Shegji a nod. "On my cue," I whispered, my voice thin and strange without the gravelly performance. I keyed the mic. "They're coming over the West Ridge," I screamed into it, my voice cracking, pitching high with panic. "It's a spore cloud, a big one. God, oh God, it's rolling in right on our flank. They can't see it from the gate. It's right on our blind spot." The second impact on the gate was louder, a final, definitive crack of breaking timber. I didn't stop. I improvised, pulling from a dozen panicked characters I had played in auditions for roles I never got. I was the terrified scout, the dying soldier, the man left behind. My performance was broadcast over their channel and through the speakers wired around our own camp. Everyone in Haven heard me, not as their fearless leader, but as a gibbering, terrified man. I saw the refiner commander through a gap in the wall. He was yelling orders, pushing his men forward through the breach. Then he paused, his head cocked towards the radio on his hip. He heard my broadcast. The fear of HFS, of the Fade, was more primal than any objective. He hesitated, his arm held up, stopping the advance for just a few seconds to verify the threat. That hesitation was all Shegji needed. She moved, a blur of motion leading her team through a side gate, hitting the stalled refiner assault on its exposed flank. The night erupted in gunfire, short, controlled bursts from her people against the wild spray of the surprised refiners. I could hear her shouts, not of panic, but of tactical command. It was brutal and precise. In minutes, the firing tapered off. The siege was broken. The refiners were dragging their wounded, scrambling back into the darkness. Haven was saved. Shegji found me standing over the radio, shaking so hard I could barely stand. One of the loggers came running up, his face beaming, ready to slap the back of his hero, Jedek. He stopped a few feet away, his expression changing as he remembered the voice he had just heard over the speakers. He looked at me, then looked away, the hero worship in his eyes replaced by a confused pity. The truth was out, as clear as the smoke rising from the gate. Weeks later, Haven was a different place. It was quieter, the work of rebuilding done with a grim focus under Shegji's reluctant but effective leadership. Kexey was alive. He moved with a permanent limp, his face serious and thin. I watched him from my post on the wall as he sat in the yard, patiently stripping and cleaning a rifle. He never looked at me. I was on watch duty, just another anonymous body leaning against the timber. My expensive survival gear was torn and hung loose on my thin frame. My beard was untidy, real. Another survivor passed me on the walkway, a man I barely knew. He grunted, squinting at the sky. Winds picking up from the west. I nodded, my eyes on the distant tree line. "I know," I said. I was no longer the hero. But I watched Kexey as he patiently showed a younger teenager how to properly oil the rifle's bolt, his movements slow and deliberate, his voice low and confident. He wasn't performing. He was teaching. I had lost my audience, my name, my entire fiction. But for the first time since coming to this place, I was a survivor.